right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know that a lot of the other teachers have obligations and are probably getting prepped and ready for that. So next week, of course, we're going to be having our Sunday school lesson with the emphasis on the birth of Jesus. Then we will return back to the book of Genesis, chapter 31, after next week. But the Luke passage is, of course, where Gabriel comes and announces to Mary the fact that she will bring into the world God. Okay, and so yeah, no pressure. But I started out with the focus of asking if people have ever received a long anticipated answer to prayer, and how did that make them feel, right? Most of us have done that, where we've waited and waited on the Lord. But when the fulfillment of that comes, it's always so special, right? So if you want to, you can use that introduction. But what I emphasize is the fact that all the way through the Old Testament, especially following the Babylonian captivity, the Jewish people have a heightened expectation that God is going to send his Messiah. Now, in their mind, a lot of times they were thinking more of a political Messiah who was going to deliver them from the foreign entities that had ruled over them. And I even delineated, following the Babylonians, how many different foreign nations ruled over Israel leading up to the Romans. But in the fullness of time, the Romans are in control, and it's time. But there was this messianic expectation on the part of the Jews. They were planning on a Messiah coming, and they were looking forward to being independent and God reestablishing his kingdom with them as a theocracy. All right? So God fulfills his promises completely. That's our big thesis. Yes?
Is it a stretch to try to connect that expectation that they had of the Messiah with our expectation
of the second coming?
Yeah.
No, it's not a stretch. I mean, the same anticipation exists.
Yeah.
And you've heard me say before, it's the genius of the Christian era that every generation of believers have believed they're the ones that were going to be alive when Jesus came back. And here, after all of these millennia, we are more excited than ever.
We know it's us.
We know it's us, exactly. But no, same analogy. Absolutely right. There's an anticipation and expectation. Good analogy. Really, I took this big idea and put it in here. God fulfills his promises completely, but we can certainly follow what the pastor's been teaching the last few weeks on promises made, promises kept, right? And that certainly is fulfilled here. All right, moving quickly through this. At first, Gabriel comes and there's a greeting to Mary, and it starts out in verse 26, right after the story that tells us about the Elizabeth and Zechariah going to have a child. His name is going to be John, of course. And right after that information that Elizabeth is pregnant, then it says in the 6th month, which refers to the time that Gabriel had announced to Zechariah about their baby coming. Then Gabriel shows up to talk to Mary about this great announcement. And so I went ahead and included that Gabriel is mentioned by name 4 times in the scriptures. I don't know that anybody would be able to recall all of them, but actually it's twice in the book of Daniel he's mentioned by name. Then his name is mentioned in the pronouncement to Zechariah and now to Mary. And I included, it's possible that it was Gabriel that met as well, spoke to Joseph later about reassuring him. But I looked carefully at the text. It does not say Gabriel there. All right. So he appears to Mary. And of course, immediately, as all angelic appearances do to humans, he says what?
Fear not.
Fear not. Yeah, don't be afraid. But what is it that Gabriel says that God has observed in Mary? What is it that twice God's attitude towards Mary is stated?
Excuse me.
Yes. You are favored. You are highly favored. All right? Now that just speaks volumes to the character of this young girl. For God to have evaluated her as being highly favored, that is quite a statement. But I asked the question, would you consider Gabriel's message to Mary more troubling or confusing? Because really it's both. She is absolutely unexpecting this. There's no reason why Mary would have had any inclination that she would be chosen. The other part of that is, within this expectation of a messianic hope that was really kind of at a crescendo at this time, there were a lot of young Jewish girls who were completely willing to fulfill Isaiah 7:14 that we looked at last week in church, that a virgin shall conceive. And these Jewish maidens, they were willing, but it was still unexpected when Mary was chosen. All right. I explained a little bit about the betrothal situation. That's part of what's unsettling to Mary. She's betrothed to Joseph. How is Joseph going to react to all of this? But of course, they were in this waiting period, and they had never been together physically. And so that is what causes Mary some real question. All right. And I explained that in point 2, the promise. And again, if we look at the Old Testament, we've been studying that even in our worship services, how the preponderance of Isaiah, as far as the messianic preaching prophecies, are in Isaiah, but they're all throughout the Old Testament. We talked about Genesis 3:15 earlier, but that's why there is this continually building emphasis on the Messiah coming, and that's why there was this expectation. All right. I asked the question in the second bullet, why was it important for Gabriel to tell Mary that Jesus would be different from other Jewish boys? Well, in his explanation of this baby, he explained he was deity. All right? And that he would be in the lineage of David, and that his kingdom would be established forever. All of those things are part of Gabriel's announcement about Jesus, including the fact that we will name him Jesus. Because the angel here, Gabriel, announces it to Mary, his name will be Jesus, and then again, when Joseph is told, it's said that his name would be Jesus. And I just once again included for everybody's memory, the name Jesus means Yahweh is salvation. Yes. Gabriel told Joseph the meaning of Jesus was, he will save his people from their sins.
Well, which is right.
They are both right. They are both right. It's salvation, and specifically, he's coming to save his people. And so Jesus' name disclosed the purpose of the incarnation. All right, related to the explanation then, because obviously Mary has questions. How can this be, right? And so I thought it was interesting, and I included this in our discussion, but whether people have thought about it or not, the pregnancy of Mary was pretty much just a typical pregnancy. A baby growing to maturity within a woman's womb. That part of the pregnancy was very typical. But the conception issue, that's the question, right? And that's a question Mary obviously has.
So whose name they put on the birth certificate?
On the birth certificate, his father is God. I wanted to emphasize this. Right at the top of the third page, when Gabriel made his prophecy to Mary, she obviously had questions. Notice that Mary asked the question, how? Gabriel answered the question with who? And of course, what I'm elaborating on there is the fact that Mary says, how can this thing be? I've never been with a man, right? But Gabriel's answer is that the Creator God is going to do this. And it's going to be a supernatural act. It's interesting that in verse 35, all three members of the Godhead are there. The Holy Spirit will come upon you. God will do this, and the result will be the Son of God, right? And so I suggest, in that verse, it says, the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. And it's really just a clear impression that God was going to cover her as a shadow, and out of that would come this most amazing result, the pregnancy of a virgin. And then I conclude my thought with, this was a creative act that would rival the creation of the world. The fact that God was going to become a man. Okay? We have to hasten just to wrap this up, but Gabriel also then explained, because it's kind of interesting, and it maybe even seems out of place, because after Gabriel tells Mary all about this, she says, oh, by the way, your cousin Elizabeth is also pregnant. Okay? So I included the fact that Mary was of the tribe of Judah, because Jesus is going to be the lion of the tribe of Judah, right? Come through the lineage of David. Elizabeth was of the tribe of Levi. Both Zechariah and Elizabeth were Levites. They were priests' family. But they were married, they were related by marriage. And so that's how we get this relationship between Mary and Elizabeth. But why again did Gabriel say, hey, by the way, Elizabeth is also pregnant? What would have been the issue there? Why would that have been important for Mary to know?
Well, she was an older lady.
Okay, yes.
So we got kind of another miracle thing going on.
Exactly. And that's really the point of this. Oh, by the way, Elizabeth is also pregnant. And she's already 6 months pregnant. And Mary knew that Elizabeth had been barren her whole life. And now in her old age, she was going to have a baby. Well, if God can do that for Elizabeth, then he can fulfill this with me. And so that's part of the teaching lesson there, is that it was just one more confirmation to reassure Mary that God can do all of this. And then you'll remember, Mary goes down and spends some time, several months, with Elizabeth while her early pregnancy is developing. Okay, then the final point there is Mary's submission at the point of commitment. In the final verse there, this is where Mary just says, Lord, I'm your handmaid, Lord, use me however you can. And it is just a beautiful and wonderful picture of her humility, but also speaks to the issue of why God chose this girl. Yeah. She is highly favored of God, and yet she is willing to take on this task, not having any idea how profoundly this was going to change her life. But she says she's willing, and she submits, and she said, be it unto your handmaiden as you want it to be, right? And so this was a significant step of faith on Mary's part to accept this most unusual and historic and significant act of God.
Good thing she didn't say no.
Might have been a problem, huh?
Actually, she went to spend time with Elizabeth because they were going to plan a big family reunion.
Were they?
Yeah.
Is that the plan? Okay, well, we never know when that reunion took place,
Jesus
except
and John,
when John met at that water.
No,
Yeah.
No, they were out playing.
Out playing together, were
The
they
family
later?
reunion.
Yes, okay. When you find that verse, I want to make sure I mark that down.
The other
Okay.
version.
Yeah, okay. All right, have fun with this. I know you will. And have a Merry Christmas, everybody.